Sriparna. Hope all of you are doing well. So, we have already discussed with you all the different parts of teaching aptitude and some topics on research aptitude also. So, today we are going to explain some new concepts on research aptitude, and you all know that this chapter on research aptitude will help candidates in preparation of NTA UGC Net Paper 1, and it will be equally important for their academic journey, which will start with MPhil or PhD enrollment. And undoubtedly, research aptitude is important as it is part of the syllabus of NET examination, and usually there are 5 to 6 questions from this topic also. And it should be kept in mind as learner that it is not just important from the exam perspective but also the knowledge or experience of research will be helpful in teaching as well. And this chapter will help teachers in staying up to date with latest developments in their subject. So that's why it is one of the most interesting chapter of NTA UGC NET examination general paper, obviously paper 1. Okay, so if you have any doubt on it, so please check my previous sessions once. I think it will be a really helpful session to everyone. And please feel free to ask any question in my comment section. I will reply you, I promise. So if you have missed my previous session, so please go and check it once. And all previous sessions links are mentioned in my first comment and my description box. Okay, so let's begin the session and move on the next slide. Here we can see some concept which we are discussing today. So the first one, that is concept of sampling, the second one, that is probability and non-probability sampling, and this is basically the related to the types of sampling. And we all know that in my previous session sampling is of two types. The first one is probability and the second one is non-probability. So here we will discuss elaborative discussion on uh, probability and non-probability sampling. So, learner, if you have any doubt on it, so please do check my previous session once, and please feel free to ask uh, anything in my comment section. I will reply you. So here we can see some topics which we are discussing today. So the first concept, that is concept of sampling, and we have already told what is the basic meaning of sampling, but today we are going to explanation on sampling, detailed explanation on sampling and types of sampling. And now going to the second topic, that is probability and non-probability sampling, and we have already told sampling is of two types, that is probability and non-probability. Okay, and now going to the third and fourth concept, that is discussion on term paper, seminar, workshop, difference between seminar and workshop, etc. So let's begin the session and move on the main slide. Here we can see the simple random sampling. So at first we have to know what do you mean by a simple random sampling and systematic sampling. So simple random sampling is basically a type of probability sampling. We have already told there are two types of sampling. So here we can see simple random sampling and systematic sampling. And we have already told sampling is of two types. The first one is probability and non-probability. And simple random sampling and systematic sampling both are related to the probability sampling. So that's why simple random sampling is a type of probability sampling in which the researcher randomly selects a subset of participants or subset or population from a population. So basically, researcher in this type of probability sampling, researcher randomly selects a subset or the sample size from the whole population, and each and every unit of sample has an equal chance of selection. So now going to the definition of the simple random sampling, every element of the population has equal chance of selection in the sample. So basically it is meant to be an unbiased representation of a group. Okay, and in this uh, method, every element of the population has equal chance of selection. We have already told that part, but why we are using it, why we are using the simple random sampling? So simple random sampling is used when complete and accurate sampling frame is available. For example, we can say the lottery method, the random number table, the computer programs, etc., can be used to draw sample randomly, and these are used to avoid bias in the selection of sample. But some disadvantages of simple random sampling is present. So one of the most and in disadvantage of this method, of this probability method, that is, it can be time consuming unless computer programs are used, and it can be costly if there is no list of population size or available. So for example, we consider that one has to choose a phone number randomly with a computer program and doesn't have the list of phone numbers. So these will be costly and time consuming, as there is a need to check if the randomly generated phone number exists or not. So also it needs to be checked if it belongs to the population or not. So the cost of the data collection can increase. So this is one of the most important disadvantage of simple random sampling. But what is the advantage of simple random sampling? And because it is easy in use, and it is used when we have a complete or accurate sampling frame. Okay, and I think this is clear. What do you mean by a simple random sampling? Okay, so now going to the next probability method, that is systematic sampling. So systematic sampling is selected by the following particular order, like selecting every nth unit of the population. Basically, in the systematic sampling, the sample size from the population is selected by a particular order. Okay, for example, we consider there is a need to choose a sample of 10, okay, from the total population, that is called 100 students. Okay, so for sample, one can select every 10th unit of the list of students. A question arises here: how will the first unit to be selected? The first unit of sample can be anyone chosen randomly from 1 to 9 students of the list. Suppose the 4 students on the list. Okay, so there are total population is 100 and the sample size is 10. Okay, so we suppose that 4 student on the list is selected randomly as the first unit of sample, then every following 10 students will be selected. So the sample will consist of fourth. The first one is fourth. So the second sample size, that is 14th, now going to the 24th, now going to the 34th, etc., and so on. So it is a part of a quasi probability sampling, not the probability sampling. So it is under the quasi probability sampling. as the first person is chosen randomly, and then the subsequent persons will be chosen by calculating the next nth unit of the population. That is called the systematic sampling. I think this is clear. What do you mean by a systematic sampling? So now move on to the next. So first one is stratified sampling and the second one is cluster sampling. So at first we have to discuss the stratified one. So in from the name uh, we have to say. So Lana, here we can say two types of probability sampling. The first one is stratified sampling and the second one is cluster sampling. So at first we have to discuss what do you mean by stratified one. So in such a procedure, the population is divided into strata and then random sample is chosen from each stratum. So for example, we can say sample is to be chosen from people visiting a mall. So the total people uh, who are visiting in the mall, it indicates the total population, and then they can be categorized into different strata based on age, gender, income group and occupation or educational level, etc. So then a random sample can be chosen from each stratum. So that is known as stratified sampling. Okay. And now move on to the next one, that is the cluster sampling. So clusters will be formed from the total population. That means, and then a total cluster is chosen randomly. So there is a difference between stratified sampling and the cluster sampling. There is a difference between strata and cluster. So in strata all data are same. So that's why strata are homogeneous groups of population, whereas clusters are heterogeneous because there are different types of variables. Okay, so sample is chosen randomly from each stratum, which is known as, this process is basically known as stratified random sampling. And when a total cluster is selected and all its units get selected, and which is known as cluster sampling. I think this is clear. So now move on to the next slide. Here we can see the pictorial explanation on stratified random sampling. And we all know that what is the basic meaning of stratified random sampling. So in such a type of sampling, the total population is divided into strata. So here we can see there are four strata, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay, so then random samples is chosen from each stratum. So that's why number 10 is selected as a sample randomly from first strata. Number 2 is selected or chosen from second strata. Number 8 is chosen from 8. And number 5 is chosen from number 4th strata. I think this is clear. What do you mean by a stratified sampling? And each of the strata, in each strata, all data are homogeneous because 1, 10 and 12, all the homogeneous, all are homogeneous. Okay, so that's why strata are homogeneous groups of population. Okay, so I think this is clear. So now move on to the next slide where we can see the pictorial explanation on the cluster sampling. Okay, and what are the basic difference between stratified and cluster sampling. So now move on to the next slide. In cluster sampling, we all know that clusters will be formed uh, from the population, from the total population. So that's why each cluster has different type of value. So that's why clusters are heterogeneous groups of population. Okay, so here we can see uh, the total. So cluster there are one, two, three, four, five, six. Total six clusters will be formed from the total population, and then a cluster is chosen randomly. So here we have to choose the third cluster and 11, 12. That means 6 cluster. Okay, so here I have to choose 2 cluster from the total sample size. So I think what is the difference between stratified and cluster sampling is clear. And what do you mean by a cluster and strata or strata, which is also clear to everyone. So now move on to the next concept, that is non-probability sampling. Two types of non-probability sampling, and we have already told there are two types of sampling. One is probability and another one is non-probability. Okay, so we have already known probability sampling means each unit of population have an equal chance of selection. On the other hand, non-probability sampling means each unit of population have an equal chance of selection, and selection is not random in such sampling. So, quota sampling, snowball sampling, and purposive sampling all are under the non probability sampling. So, at first, we have to know what do you mean by a quota sampling. So, in quota sampling, the total population is divided into some groups. Okay, not strata, not cluster, and not anything. So basically, the total population is divided into some groups, and then each and every group is allocated quota of same proportion as it has in the total population. Suppose in a population of 500 researchers of a university, so 50% belongs to science, 40% belongs to social science, and 10% only belongs to the language. So we have to select a sample of 100. Okay, so out of 500 researchers, then should be in the same proportion in the sample. That means in a sample size of 100, there should be 50 from science, 40 from social science, and 10 from language. This process is called as quota sampling process, and it has an equal chance of selection, and selection is non random obviously. So now going to the next one, that is snowball sampling. So what do you mean by snowball sampling, learner? Basically, in this type of sampling, initially the sample size is very small. So very small, we have to choose a very small sample size. It is much smaller than what is required also. Then the selected sample units help in further selection of more units. Then the new units further help in identifying more units. And this process continues till the sample is smaller than the required size. In this way, the sample size keeps on growing like a snowball, which is smaller in the beginning and it keeps on growing bigger and bigger. So that's why the snowball sampling is also called the chain referral sampling. And why we are using the snowball sampling? So snowball sampling is used especially in the observational research, and which is basically a qualitative research. For example, we can say for conducting a research on the working conditions of doctors. In the beginning, we have to choose few doctors for interview, and then they can help. Those doctors can help in selecting other doctors for interview, and that's why sample size in beginning is smaller, but each rolls it keeps on growing bigger and bigger. So this process is known as snowball sampling. So now move on to the next slide. And here the purposive sampling is also under the non-probability sampling. So purposive sampling, the another name of purposive sampling is judgment sampling. But why? Because in this sampling process, total sample is selected from the population as per the judgment of the researcher. For example, we can say we have to select persons who can provide information about the research. So those units of population are selected who meet the purpose of the study only. So that's why purposive sampling is used when the population is very small. Such a sample may not be a representative sample, because we all know that sample is the true representative of the total population, but those sample are used in purposive sampling, these may not be a representative sample of total population, because the in this sampling population size is very small. I think this is clear. So, Lana, we are done for the today's session. I hope this session will be a very useful to everyone. So, if you like my session, do not forget to like, share, comment, and please do some support and subscribe to my channel for getting more useful session. And please press the bell icon button for getting notification from my side. I will come again with a new session. Till then, stay tuned. Thank you. Happy learning. Keep commenting.